Good morning, everyone. Today is Martin Luther King Day of 2021, and I'm going to address that reality, that really heroic reality, and talk about other things in relation to that. Also, this is the week in which there will be an inauguration of a new president of the United States. As it happens, the actual literal swearing in of the president and vice president will happen at exactly 9 o'clock Pacific Standard Time. So rather than having the broadcast that I would usually have, I myself, I think, will tune into the inauguration. I'm not talking politics. I'm talking about the fact that this is an extremely important moment in the future of our country. And I think if all of us put our attention to it in one way or another, with prayer and gratitude to God and a deep adding our support to the principles of this country, that we can move forward in a way that is pleasing to God and in harmony with high ideals. So just to keep consistent, I'll do a broadcast on Friday this week so that I'll have 4 in a week, because I don't want to get in the habit of canceling them. But I didn't feel comfortable speaking directly against that important event. And the third thing is, this is Monday, and Monday is named for the moon, but there's also a relationship between the word Monday and money. And since I find myself in the position these days of needing support from all my friends in order to continue with this ministry, I've decided that every Monday I'm going to remind you that if you would like to support what we're doing to spread Master's words and Swami's teachings, you can go to Patreon, the Patreon site, Patreon. I think there's even a logo somewhere close to what you're looking at right now. And you can see how you can become a regular supporter. And I would be very grateful if you would consider that. So now let's start with the prayer. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, Beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, Beloved Master Paramhansa Yogananda, Saints of all religions, dearest friend Swami Kriyananda, humbly we bow to you all. We are your children, doing our very best to live up to your ideals. We are confused at times, though. Delusion takes over, desire blinds us, fatigue, lack of courage. All of these qualities can be overcome and will be overcome by our determination and your grace. Help us to always be attuned to your presence in our lives, that we may move ever swiftly into the pure light of your joy. Om, peace. Amen. I'm of an age in which the whole civil rights movement of the 60s and the life of Martin Luther King himself was actually a part of my upbringing. I was just the right age. I was a teenager during all of that period of time, which is to say, it's a time of great idealism and interest in transformation. I was living in El Paso, Texas. I lived there until I was 15 or 16. And my family is Jewish, and even though we weren't religious practitioners, my father especially, but our whole family was very much ethical justice kinds of Jews, which is the way a lot of Jewish people express their religion, is this idealism about right action. El Paso is at the absolute far western tip of Texas, but it's still Texas, and Texas is a southern state, was a southern state. And there were some remnants of segregation still in El Paso when I was growing up. And my father and a group of other friends took it upon themselves to actively work to desegregate wherever segregation was still in place. When I became old enough to know what he was doing, I remember asking him if it was dangerous. And he said, no, we're far enough from the deep south that he didn't think it was dangerous. And there was never any sign of danger. I, I, I don't know what my father would have done if it had actually put him and our family in danger. He wasn't tested, and I don't know where he would have gone in that respect. But I did find out because the Freedom Summer, I was old enough to go. I feel like I was 16. Maybe we were in California by then, I don't know. But whenever it was, I just assumed that I would go. And I assumed that my parents would support me. I couldn't have been more than 16, but they wouldn't even consider it. They thought I was far too young. They knew that I was utterly naive about what I might be getting myself into. And I was shocked that they wouldn't let me go. I just thought it would be consistent with their principles. I'm not holding them to blame. I don't think if I had had a 16-year-old daughter, I could have let her go either. But I always remembered that so therefore I never actually got to be a part of it, although it felt so natural to me to do that. Many incarnations of revolutionary kind of work. So I was extremely touched later in my life when I met Sheila Rush, who was named by Swamiji Naidruva. And Sheila is a longtime member of Ananda. And she was um, she was one of the first women to graduate from Harvard Law School. In fact, some of her classmates wrote a little book about it because there were about 5 of them. And it was like the first time that the Harvard Law School had actually a coterie of women going through that class. And she was the first Black woman. I believe she was the first Black woman to graduate from Harvard Law School. And she had gone to law school just um, because she had just had a divine calling that she was supposed to do it. And it hadn't really been in her life plan, but she felt a divine calling that she was supposed to go to law school. So she went to Harvard. As soon as she graduated, the timing was such, she's a few years older than I. The timing was such, she doesn't like to have her age known. I apologize. But anyway, she graduated in such a time that she immediately went to work for Martin Luther King. And I say this because Naidruva and I have been best friends forever. And so I was actually able to talk to her a lot about what that was like and so on. And she immediately wanted to go to the South. But being an attorney, they thought she could be more useful in the North. So she worked in the North, and it was dangerous to send young women. She was in her 20s at that point. It was very dangerous for young women in the South to be doing this work. But they thought she would be more useful in the North. And so she worked. And later on, Naidruva became part of our effort. She was absolutely central to Ananda's effort to defend itself from the attack that we had from the other spiritual organization that went after us. And Naidruva told me that when she was working for Martin Luther King, what they did was they were very creative in the application of the law. The essence of it was they took laws that were intended for another purpose and then used them to establish the freedom, civil rights. It was very true in the real estate laws. There were lots of real estate laws that were written for one purpose that they were able to turn to use for the purpose of gradually litigating and eventually, of course, winning tremendous number of reformations in the legal system. And let me think. And so when she finally was working for Ananda many years later, she said she was already well trained in what you would call the Martian solution. Instead of looking down just the straight path, you would think that even though this law might not have been written for this purpose, it could be used for this purpose. That's a side thing, but she would just talk to me about that. One of the most meaningful things I remember her telling me about her, what she knew about Martin Luther King, because she'd met him and she worked with people who knew him. She actually moved at the sort of the highest national level of extraordinarily talented Black people who were just really moving in and changing the society. And all of her friends, almost all of her friends became nationally important. And she instead went to Ananda Just very interesting karma. But she was talking to me about one of the most dramatic moments. In fact, the moment that helped turn the tide was when the effort was in Selma, Alabama, and I forgive me, I've read about this and studied, but this is how I understand it. There was a particular bridge, and the protesters were going across that bridge, and on the other side there was this fierce opposition, police opposition with dogs that was going to try to stop them. And when Martin Luther King gave the direction, he told them basically when they got to this certain point and they saw that they were going to be stopped, he said, go down on your knees and pray. Now, first of all, that in itself is extremely moving that they would go down on their knees and pray. But Naidruva said, he also said, because then you won't be able to run away. Because he also understood what he was asking them to do, because they sick the dogs on these people. And what happened was that entire incident was filmed and it went on national television. And when the rest of the country and the rest of the world saw these poor, innocent people just trying to get their legal rights on their knees being attacked by dogs, that's going to make me cry when I think about it. So, in talking about him and about this period of our history, the title I came up with was Heroic Love. Because every so often in the course of history, and by the grace of God, it happens on a regular basis, genuine heroes are born into human society. And almost always they are deeply spiritual people, because it takes some kind of transcendent power in order to have the courage and the willingness to sacrifice so much out of a greater love. And I've read a lot over the years about Martin Luther King and his movement and all of these things. This kind of heroism has always moved me very deeply. It's a value to which I have long aspired. And when I say long, I believe in many lifetimes, um, backing lesser causes. And this is not a lesser cause. His cause was a noble one. I mean, his cause was a divine one. But I myself, I know, have backed lesser causes, but always seeking a transcendent value for which I could live, which of course has eventually led me to the spiritual path. And Martin Luther King was a man of deep faith, and he was called to this. And when you read just the details of his life, he was well established outside of the South. And his wife was well established outside of the South. They had simply escaped from the worst of all of that and were making a life. And no part of America was congenial or was entirely fair to Black people at that time. But it was certainly not dangerous. But he felt called. He felt called to go back into the lion's den, which he did. And he risked his family. I said, I don't know what my father would have done, but we know what he did. He risked himself and he risked his family. And of course, you could think it's that horrible dilemma of being faced with a man's obligation to protect his family should be foremost, unless a higher duty comes. And he saw that higher duty. It's unfathomable to those of us who haven't had to live through it or can't remember it from another incarnation. What it is to be afraid in the place that is supposed to be your own home, and what it is to be subject to random, violent oppression. I just, we who have skin color such as mine and a condition in life such as mine has been, I know I expressed to all of you, it wasn't until I was in India and an Indian friend of mine, that would have been like in the late 80s, an Indian friend returned referred to the fact that a friend of his had married an American, and he called her a white woman. My friend married a white woman. And it was like, oh, of course, that's me, you know. And as I said in another context, I knew I was Jewish, but I didn't know that I was white, because it just was. But then I said, I have said before, and I will say again, any person with dark skin in this country knows they have dark skin. And, this is a very serious and terrible karma. And for whatever reason, as a country, I mean, for whatever reason, those of us who are living here now are here because it's part of our job now to expiate this bad karma. There's uh, people have been commenting about sort of as this these historic abuses and current time abuses are being more and more exposed, and it's less and less possible for a person to be indifferent or claim ignorance for what is happening. Wait just a second, I lost my thought there. Um, well, I just, unfortunately, the thought went away. But it's less and less possible to claim ignorance. It's just like every person. Oh, I know what I was going to say. I've heard people say about Americans, this is not who we are. But I've heard a corrective to that, which is, yeah, of course, this is who we are. You can't say this is not who we are, because if it's happening, it's who we are, if we're talking about our national country, national character. But what we're really saying is, this is not who we aspire to be. And so, but this is true about all of us who are seeking God realization, which is, of course, the people to whom I'm speaking. This is not a political speech. This is not a call to that kind of action. But all of us who live by aspiration recognize that we're all living by aspiration. Swami talked about how it came to him so deeply. He talked about a particular experience in the middle of the night when he was in a hotel in Florence, and it just came to him so vividly that every living, every sentient creature, and certainly every human being is actually operating with the same longing. And the longings are just so basic: to be loved, to be secure, to not be lonely, to not be afraid. All of these things are true. But everyone chooses a different way of, has a different set of beliefs about where and how those qualities will be fulfilled. But all of us are rivers seeking the sea. All of us are bubbles of divinity seeking to merge back with the ocean. But some are deeply misguided as to where that fulfillment will come from. And Master was quite definite about it. He was not naive when he talks about, the ideal world civilization. It includes a police force, a world police force. He said, because bullies will always arise, and bullies need to be contained. So we live in a world where there is a lot of shadow, but there can't be shadow without there being light. And the more light there is, the less shadow there is. And so what we have to understand and deeply appreciate, especially when we see such heroism as Martin Luther King was willing to put forward, and the heroism of those people who put their lives on the line. This wasn't just sitting around talking about it. And a lot of them were quite young. There was a very strong, teenagers, and even sometimes children, and people in their 20s. It was really a youth movement, because there's a kind of divine creative power in the early stages of life before you've been beaten down, where you know what's right. And then you begin to think, it's what else am I living for except for what is right? And the fact that we've elevated those heroes to a national holiday is greatly to our credit. and what we have to draw from them. And I actually think about, I started by telling you that story about Martin Luther King asking them to kneel at that critical moment. I often think about that. I mean, even just the courage to kneel. Now, of course, it puts you in relationship to God. But if Nidruva knew why he asked them, did he tell them all that? In this moment, you'll want to run. See, this is the dynamic that all of us are living with all the time. We know who we're supposed to be, and then when we get right to the edge of it, we become frightened, and we cling. We just cling to our littleness, very much like the bird in the cage, even when the door is opened. But oh, we can gain so much from meditating and respecting and looking with deep gratitude at those who were willing to to love heroically, to express heroic love. My incarnation doesn't matter. When people went to fight for civil rights, and many of them suffered, were imprisoned, and some of them died. They just gave their life for it. I was naively at 16 thinking I could just go down there and do some good. I'm sure I never thought about the fact that I might be injured or killed. My parents had to tell me that. But you see, the freedom of not even really thinking about it, that's what gives it power. This is a certain childlike love that becomes heroic love, partly because we know and partly because we don't know, but we're willing to do it. God calls us at times to be much more than we think we can be. And the example of those who are able really to answer that call and to stay the course. And of course, they completely changed our country and brought it back to where it really needs to be. And of course, this is all very, very new. I read a brief essay by a man named Brother Toby, who's the founder of a community in Napa. He's 90 years old now. He's been doing this for a long time. And oh my goodness, I keep losing my thoughts. What was it that he said? Oh my goodness. I'll give him credit, but I don't know what I was going to tell you that he said. Oh, he was pointing out how very, very new it is, really. Oh, I know what it was now. He said he and his friends, this he talked about back when he was in school, and he said just before one of his history classes, he and his friends were talking about the significance of some recent event in the course of their lives. And their history teacher says it takes at least 100 years before the significance of any event is really understood. He said probably 200 years. And it's like as recently, 100 years ago, we were not a country of equal opportunity. We were not a country in which race and religion were not limiting factors or factors of oppression in many people's lives. It's really been a very short period of time that the real ideals of this country have even begun to be expressed. It's just so we're still the pioneers, and heroic love is still required. And we're at a big transition point. This 2021 Martin Luther King Day is really in many ways like none other because of all that's transpired in the last months. So my hope for myself, which I'm sharing with all of you, is not necessarily that we move out onto the streets to take action, unless you feel called to do that. But that we recognize in our hearts that we were born at this time, in this place, in this country, or in this world, since many of you are not in the USA, for a real purpose. And there is a real struggle for human dignity going on right now. And everything happens first on the level of vibration and thought. And we have to dedicate ourselves to that cause. It's not freedom summer anymore. I'm not 16. That's not what's being asked of me. But the power of our commitment to idealism and to heroic love, it's a more powerful call than it's ever been. And never underestimate what we alone can do. I believe, and I don't know what context, I mentioned a friend of mine who went through a period of very ill health and really just couldn't do anything for a number of years. But she found great comfort in her relationship with God and saying, she said, even if there's nothing that I can do to express it, she said, I'll be one more person on this planet who's on your side, on the side of light, on the side of bliss, on the side of heroic love. Because even if, as Master said, a global police force is necessary to keep bullies from running rampant over the innocent, that doesn't mean that we don't have compassion and love in our hearts. Sometimes tough love is required. To love does not mean to be a doormat. To love means to plant ourselves in the highest truth that we are able to perceive, and then quietly, without exception, simply hold on. That's what's being asked of us. That's what we're here to do. It's a wonderful time to be living because each one of us can make so much difference. When there is a battle between light and shadow, then every little bit of light is treasured in the eyes of God and in the future of the planet. So I thought today, above all days, is a really good time for us to give homage and respect to heroic love that has been expressed before, and let it be for all of us in precisely this way, which is a great need of our age. In Autobiography of a Yogi, published in 1946, Master spoke of Babaji and Jesus together have planned the salvation of this age, and they are deeply concerned about racial prejudice and religious bigotry. Well, there we are. Those are our instructions, aren't they? Let us all also become very concerned about racial prejudice and religious bigotry. And their solution is attunement to God, experience of God, not theological, not dogmatic, but living in the light. And with that comes the capacity to love like a hero. God bless you.